Good afternoon and welcome back to A Cup of Hope. Today, our topic is the reality and risks for runaway and homeless youth. Many are aware that homelessness is a major social concern in the United States. However, did you know that between 500,000 and 2.8 million youth experience homelessness within the United States each year? To make matters worse, runaway and homeless youth are at a particularly high risk for human trafficking. In fact, one study found that nearly 1 in 5 were identified as victims of some form of human trafficking, and that 91% had been approached by someone offering an opportunity for income that was too good to be true. So let us learn how we as concerned citizens and family members can support the youth in our lives to prevent human trafficking within our community. Today, we will be joined by our regular panelists, Hannah McPeak, the Director of Education at Hope Against Trafficking, and Emily Johnson, Program Coordinator at the Michigan Abolitionist Project. Today, our special guest is from Common Ground, May Freck. She is the Youth Empowerment Coordinator and Community Outreach. May is she's at Common Ground's Sanctuary, Runaway, and Homeless Youth Shelter. She's worked for the shelter for 4 years and has been at Common Ground for over 6, starting with the agency as a volunteer and then employee on the resource and crisis line. May primarily works in an outreach and educational capacity in her current role, but is also the staff liaison for the agency's Youth Leadership Council. She regularly connects with youth during and after their experiences with running away and homelessness. May is also deeply involved with the LGBTQ community, as she is personally a part of it, and professionally and academically has focused on issues youth in that community face, including exploitation. Now, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists.
Hello. It's so exciting to be here with everybody. We've kind of had a little break in the summer and we're all back and so excited to see your faces. May, so good to meet you and have you here with us. Everybody enjoyed their summer so far. It's like kind of nearing the end, I feel like.
Yeah. Time is flying.
Time
is flying.
Yeah.
But May, we are so excited to have you today, especially with this episode on runaway and homeless youth and LGBTQ youth. And you working at Common Ground as a youth empowerment coordinator and community outreach. Can you explain a little bit more what that is, what that means, what your role at Common Ground is, and even your personal experience to our topic today? Give us.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to, when I go out in the community, I always when I introduce myself, I'm like, and I know that my job title tells you nothing about what I do in my role. So I'm very used to kind of just breaking it down. I always kind of say I have 3 hats. So as was mentioned before, I do outreach in the community, and then I am the staff liaison for our Youth Leadership Council. And the final kind of hat that I wear that probably won't come up too much today, but I am a certified prevention specialist, and I do coordinate kind of our substance use prevention here at the shelter as well. So that's another topic I'm familiar with. But as was mentioned in my introduction, I am personally part of the LGBTQ community. So that on a personal level is very important to me, but I also focused on it academically and in my role here as well, talking about that community. So when that comes up, that's kind of the lens, the angle that I'm talking about it as we talk about it today. Oh, and just the last thing I'll mention is I have had experience through our mentoring program, which was previously just for youth survivors of human trafficking. And we did education and outreach on human trafficking in the community and all that kind of stuff through that grant for several years. So that's kind of my background with all this stuff.
Perfect. She is the perfect fit for our conversation today.
Yay!
Yes.
We're so excited.
So well-rounded. Yeah. So, so Hannah, I understand there's a lot of statistics out there. With runaway and homeless youth, how it relates to human trafficking, LGBTQ youth. Can you maybe list off a few of those or get into that a little bit?
Yeah. So, and I'm going to read some of them because I don't have them all memorized. But so we're talking about the runaway homeless youth and the LGBTQ community, and young adults between ages of 18 and 25 have experienced homelessness within the last 12 months at over twice the rate of the non-LGBTQ peers. And really, young people who identified as LGBTQ make up about 20% of those young adults who reported homelessness. And the same survey found that 27% of LGBTQ identified youth have exchanged sex for basic needs versus the 9% of their non-LGBTQ peers. So that's like three times that of the non-LGBTQ peers. And the Voices of Youth Count and Missed Opportunities is the group that did this study and found this information. And then African Americans account for 40% of people experiencing homelessness, and half of these homeless individuals are families with children, or not individuals, but half of those that are in this category are families with children. So this is definitely an issue with the LGBTQ community and the Black community. I mean, the marginalized. And now let's like foster care. An estimated 20% of young adults who are in care become homeless immediately after they're emancipated at the age of 18. So 50% of the homeless population spend time in the foster care system, right? And previously mentioned in the Voices of Youth Count survey found that the group with the highest rates of homelessness were youth that were Black and part of the LGBT community. So to sum that up. And but my question to you, May, with sort of relationship to this picture is, do you see these statistics, accurately reflected in the youth that you serve at Common Ground locally here in Royal Oak, Michigan?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know sometimes we hear these statistics, right? Or we look them up. We go to an event like this and we hear it. And we're okay. We see those numbers. But the reality is, when you work in a shelter like I do, I'm in the shelter right now. You do see those statistics kind of bear out over who you're working with. I mean, the vast majority of our youth are youth of color, and I would say in particular our Black youth, and a large amount of those youth are LGBTQ as well. Really, I would say, especially in the past year or so, a huge amount of our youth have specifically been transgender. So we definitely see that. And I think the other thing that is kind of important when we're having this conversation and talking about are we seeing this in spaces like shelters and things like that, is that, taking it further into the exploitation, the trafficking lens, is that they're still particularly vulnerable, these groups, when they are in our services, to then leave, right? Because let's say they're at a shelter, let's say we have a young LGBTQ client who is at a shelter where they haven't done training or things like that on LGBTQ topics. None of the staff knows about it. And so the staff continually makes jokes about it, and they don't even realize what they're doing, but they're kind of invalidating this youth's identity. That youth is very, very likely to say, you know what, I don't want to stay here, and to leave. And they're already at a shelter. So the place that maybe they're supposed to be with a parent or guardian, obviously they left there for some reason. And now they don't even feel comfortable staying at a program. And then I think we directly see how then, that youth is particularly vulnerable to then leaving somewhere like a community resource that was supposed to be there to help them. And now they're on the streets instead. And I think that's kind of, for a long time, how that kind of stuff has gone, that kind of path down to where things like that happen. So that's kind of how it I would say, how those statistics kind of bear out in real life in a very small snapshot, because obviously we could go a lot deeper, but yeah.
I feel like the consistent thing though, May, when you were talking about sort of those layers of maybe rejection, are stemming from, I feel like that this is all stemming from the primary issue of lack of education and awareness, or lack of understanding. And
yeah, it's systemic, right? It's not just one parent who like is homophobic, right? It would be so much easier if that's what it was. Obviously I don't want that to ever happen, but if it's just this one person with an individual viewpoint, we can deal with that a lot easier than systems upon systems that are impacted by something like homophobia or racism. So yeah, like you kind of said, it's like rejection at every level. And then I think the thing that's particularly kind of going along with that, right, is that one shelter where that youth faced homophobia, that might be the only shelter in the area where they're not doing that work. But now as a young person, I don't want to go to any shelter, right? Like I'm not going to want to go to anyone. So it can really have deep and lasting impacts beyond that. And it just all snowballs. I think snowballs is a good term for it. It all just keeps building up. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, May. That was very descriptive. That painted a good picture for sure.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that just a little bit. What are some of the big reasons a youth may become homeless or run away from their home? What's making them vulnerable or bringing them to these runaway and homeless youth shelters or on the streets in the first place?
Yeah, I would say, I think the thing that's interesting is that really I find that just about every reason that a youth comes to a shelter like us falls under the umbrella of one thing, which is a family crisis. Whatever it is, it can kind of fall under that label. It's just what is causing the family crisis and where is that happening? Did it build up over time? Was it one singular event? So some examples of that, obviously, I think the biggest one that people think of right away is any kind of abuse or neglect in the household. That one is definitely huge. I don't necessarily have numbers for like how many youth that impacts in our services, but I mean, I would say it's a huge amount. I think the problem with that topic is that we also tend to think of that in the most extreme case, when in reality, most of the cases that we see are part of the reason they're with us is because it's a little more subtle. It's more maybe like mental abuse, psychological abuse, like, comments every single day that are wearing down that youth. And so it gets to the point where, like I said, it's not this one-time event. It's every single day. Maybe I'm being told, negative things about myself. And then one day it's just, I can't handle it anymore and I leave, right? So that something like that is really common. Obviously, we do also see things like, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and things like that. But I like to focus on mental and psychological abuse just because I genuinely think we see those things more and they're just as harmful. Oftentimes they just have less proof, unfortunately. It's kind of how that happens. Other things that are huge that I think we see a lot is loss, grief. We're not good as a society at grieving, especially we aren't good at handling children when they're grieving. It's hard. We don't know how. And so a lot of times a big thing we'll see is like, there's really no problem with the parenting, but like grandma, who was a huge part of the family unit, passed away a couple months ago and no one knows how to talk about it or handle it. And now we're getting into fights every single day, like something like that. Bullying or outside issues, those ones can be huge too. Again, a lot of the families we see, the parents are not anywhere near bad people. They don't know what to do. Their kid is coming home every single day in tears, getting into fights with them, and they don't really get why. And, they come to find out the kid's being bullied at school, something like that. And then of course, there is, I think what everyone thinks almost all these situations are, but in reality is a very small amount of them, is the family itself being homeless. We do see that. It does obviously happen. I would say, though, more often than not, if there's not another one of these things intersecting, a lot of times the family is trying to stay together. So then the youth aren't like in a shelter. Quite honestly, a lot of times with that situation, the family is usually like staying in a hotel or something like that, which is extremely expensive and not easy to keep up. But like they're trying to stay together, so that definitely happens, but we don't usually have those youth in our shelter a lot of the time. The other two big ones that I'll mention, kind of going along with what we said, again, this falls under a family crisis, is family rejection of LGBTQ youth. This one is huge, and it, again, usually isn't a one-time thing. I think a lot of times in movies, if this is portrayed, it's like, you know, the youth is like, I'm gay. And the parents are like, well, you can't live in my house anymore, leave. And that's like the crisis. Does that happen? Absolutely. More often than not, though, I think what happens is, like I said, that constant kind of comments being made, things being said. And over time, really how I usually put it is the parent doesn't even have to tell the kid to leave. The message has been sent that they're not welcome there. And so maybe 6 months later, that youth is leaving the house without the parent telling them they have to, but because they don't want to stay. Who wants to stay somewhere where you're constantly being invalidated and told negative things about yourself, right? So that's another one. And we will talk kind of later on about like how we can avoid that and stuff like that for sure. And the last one I'll say that is huge, Hannah kind of brought up that statistic. I mean, when we're hearing that 50% of homeless people in this country have interacted with the foster care system, you know, we have to talk about that. And the reality is, I think it's kind of, there's layers to it. First of all, foster care youth age out of systems and their foster family, you know, sometimes they're awesome, sometimes they're not. You know, so sometimes it's not even a matter of the youth like being like, dang, I aged out of the system. Sometimes it's like, I never want to talk to those people again ever in my entire life because they were terrible to me. Right. That can happen. The other thing that I think is really important to mention is that a lot of foster care youth do not realize or don't feel comfortable taking advantage of the fact that foster care services in Michigan are still available to some extent for 18 to 21-year-olds. So when we talk about them aging out of the system, we're usually thinking of 18, but the reality is there's still a lot of support for those people, kind of that transition age. But again, if I was placed through foster care with a foster family who like for 5 years was terrible to me, I'm probably not going to want anything to do with the foster care system ever again. And yet maybe I might have a chance of having like a really cool case manager who might be able to help me. It's, you know, difficult there. So I like to mention, hey, those services still exist, but I also understand why people don't take advantage of them.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, exactly. Washing my hands of it because it was a terrible experience, you know, for possibly. But those are, I hope that everyone can kind of see why those all fall under what I would call that umbrella of family crisis. That's always kind of at the crux of the issue with young people running away or being homeless.
Or even,
I mean, it also goes to show like the level of importance it is for any human being, right? Especially youth, to have that sort of nucleus, that community. Like community is so essential, right? And when that community is broken, whether it be rejection, whether it be mental abuse, whether it be just a negative space, like that community is can break or make an individual. I feel like that's almost how important community is, right? I mean, it's just like it's so essential. Yeah.
And I like too that you say community, because it's not always family, it's not always biological family. And then when what we see, like to Emily's point that I think we're going to get into soon, is like, then I start looking for it elsewhere, and it can be, a lot of different ways. Sometimes that can be a very positive thing. If you come from a very toxic biological family, to find a very healthy, loving community that isn't a family, that's great. But it's, if you go from toxic to toxic, that's where the problem, starts.
And sometimes,
really.
Unfortunately, the help or the resources can end up being toxic too, right? And
yeah, sort of exactly. We talked about with foster care, right? Yeah. And then, if I've had a biological family that was very toxic, and then I've been sent to a foster care family that's very toxic, and then I find someone who is unfortunately exploiting me, but they're slightly less toxic than the biological family and foster care family are in different ways. Like maybe they accept my sexual orientation and no one else ever has before. We kind of just see how that person is so vulnerable to then being taken advantage of in that way. So, but I know we're going to get to that. yeah, it's such an important conversation.
But it's one of those layers that I feel like was important to sort of bring up, that whole community and like seeking, like that seeking for love, that seeking for somewhere to fit in. So my question to you is like, how, what are some of the things that, and not just parents and caregivers, but social workers, service providers, teachers in schools, like what are the things that we as a community, could do or could do better, I guess, with, to prevent a youth from running away or becoming homeless?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and this is to the point of, like you said, this isn't just a parent, this isn't just a family member, but I think it's having honest discussions and really talking about problems that are coming up or that we're seeing, because oftentimes in whatever way it is, whether it's a teacher in the classroom and there's classroom problems coming up, or it's that parent at home who's like, I don't know why my kid is like getting into we used to have a great relationship. In the past month, every single day we've had a fight. I think it's kind of just being willing to sit down and go, hey, what's going on? And I also think it's willing to, quite frankly, with that young person, be like, you don't have to tell me right now. Like, can we just talk about how you're feeling? Maybe you don't have to necessarily even tell me this day, right now, why you're feeling that way. But okay, even, at that point, it might just be them being like, I'm sad. Okay. Do you feel like telling me why you're sad right now? No. Okay. But let's honor that sadness and talk about it and what would make you feel better right now. And I think, so kind of having that discussion, about emotions and about that. And I know it sounds like sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I know it sounds very like woo-woo, like emotions and feelings. But oftentimes I think when we are looking at like youth who are really struggling in these kind of situations, it really is because their brain is still developing and they struggle to process all their emotions. And as I say that, I'm like, don't we all still kind of struggle? But particularly when we're thinking about like a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old, they might just have no, well, here's something that I'm kind of thinking of too. When I think back when I was 14, there were times when I was sad and I could not have told you why. Like, I could not have told you why. So having that honest discussion while also not being like, no, you need to tell me right now. Because that's something we talk about a lot here is like, sometimes especially as like a parent or any kind of caregiver, teacher, whoever, our response to like a kid having a hard time is, I got to fix it. I got to fix it for this kid because I care about this kid so much. But if the kid genuinely really is like, I don't know why I'm really struggling right now. I cannot explain to you, or I don't want to tell you right now. We can't just keep being like, but I need to know because I need to fix it. What might be easier, like I said, is just, or not easier, better, might just be sitting there and honoring that feeling. Another thing that I really think is important is kind of taking a deep look at it. This is going to parents, but I think it can also be, teachers, social workers, but taking a look at like your parenting style. This one is really difficult, but I think it's necessary because a lot of times, again, I have seen that instant reaction to any kind of situation like this with a young person to be batten down the hatches, more rules, more, so you can control. And a lot of times I think that comes out of a genuine want to protect, right? We want to protect our kids. And I get it. I'm not a parent, but I have a sister who's 9 years younger than me. So in some ways I am a parent and I totally get it because I watched her grow up and I that feeling of like, I don't want anything bad to happen to this person ever. I care about them so much. But sometimes it can be difficult. And here's kind of the example I usually use, which is like, how do you react to your kid or to a kid asking why a rule exists? This is something I see a lot of the parents we work with struggle with. A good rule that I usually use for this example, because I think it's a totally reasonable rule, is you have to finish your homework before you watch TV or go on the computer. Right? I think that's a totally reasonable rule to have. And yet, of course, a 12-year-old is going to be like, why? Why do I have to do that? I don't want to. I want to watch TV. I don't want to do homework. I'll do the homework later. Right? They're going to, every single thing. And I know this sounds like a small thing, but like this can really set the groundwork, I think, going forward. with how we work with young people in our lives, which is like, if this 12-year-old is asking me, why does this rule exist? I think a lot of times our, immediate feeling is to go, because it does, because it exists. Maybe I've worked all day and I'm like, this rule just exists because I say it does, whatever. We're all probably going to say that at some point to a young person, right? But all that does is make the rule seem arbitrary to them. They're just like, well, then you can't even explain to me why it exists, right? Mm-hmm. Now, on the flip side, what if I don't even have that rule? Then there's no boundary. It's confusing. When do I do my homework? I'm 12 years old. I don't have time management skills. Mm-hmm. And then I might become a 24-year-old who doesn't have time management skills. And that's why kind of the thing that I always kind of say is with this or with any kind of situation like this, it's more like explain why the rule exists, right? And then be flexible when it makes sense. Maybe this, your kid says, well, I had like 3 tests today and I am so worn out and my homework isn't due until Friday. So can I just like not do it today, please? I just need to veg out. Okay, that seems reasonable. We talked through it. You told me why. And again, this is a small thing, the time management homework thing, but it's kind of that building block of problem solving, because like the next thing that I kind of want to mention is conflict resolution, which that was kind of conflict resolution, right? For a small problem. But if I've built that groundwork to like have that with a small problem, then I can extend it to a bigger problem, the same exact way. They have those tools to have that conversation. Again, the biggest reason that we see youth like at our shelter, it is usually not huge blowout situations. It is usually we're fighting every day. They don't want to do their homework. They don't want to go to school. And a lot of times it's because they haven't been able to negotiate these situations, really have a say in things, feel listened to. I put on my notes here, and I really hold true to this, and I'm going to try and be quiet in a second because I know I'm talking so much, but I really, really think people would be surprised if in a situation where their youth did something wrong, and I mean wrong, like let's say they got into a fight at school and they like knocked the other kid out, right? And they got suspended for 2 weeks. I get it. When you get that call from the school, your response is going to be anger, confusion, concern. You're probably going to want to yell. I get it, right? Like that is total. I think all those feelings and reactions are valid, but I think a lot of people would be surprised if when something like that happened, if they sat down with their kid and just said, what happened? What were you feeling when that happened? What was that situation like for you? And could just shelve those emotions that they have on their personal end for a second and have that conversation. Usually when we talk to the kids here about stuff like that, one of the first things they say is, I know I shouldn't have done that. I know I know I'm not supposed to knock people out at school or anywhere else. They're aware, right? They're fully aware that they made a mistake. And so if instead we can talk through it, and if we've set the groundwork for things like homework and time management skills, then we can say, hey, remember, a couple months ago when we really worked through that and you told me how you were feeling, can you access that again? And can we talk about this in that same way, right? They have those tools and they can kind of do that this time. So I think it's work, right? It's work. It's doing a lot of like groundwork, building up. The term that I like to use is scaffolding, right? If we have a youth who can't even talk about time management and homework without like throwing things, that youth does not have the tools to talk about the fight they got into at school. That youth does not have the tools to talk about their dad who just passed away, right? So it's building up. It really is. And I think those are two of the biggest ones. The last one I'm just going to mention a little quickly, because I think we'll talk about this one even more later on, is seek outside help and services. Genuinely reach out to somewhere like Common Ground, reach out to the shelter, reach out to somewhere else. If you are being faced with a situation that you're like, I do not even know where to start. I think it's worth reminding yourself that you live in a community and that we are actually very lucky in Michigan in a lot of areas to have a really strong base of community services that can support you.
Absolutely. Thank you, May.
Well said.
The only thing I would mention too is a lot of times when youth are acting out, maybe that's anger or like isolation, or they're acting in a type of a certain type of behavior, it's an adaptation for something, like a need that's not being met or a feeling that they're unable to talk about. It's like a displaced adaptation to society.
Yes, because one of my favorite things I always say is there's no such thing as a bad kid, right? There are kids whose needs haven't been met who are trying to get those needs met.
Absolutely.
Like every time. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, there's this really good book I just want to throw out there for anybody who might be interested, but there's a book called Lies. This is for girls, but there's ones for men, but I wish they would. I'm like gonna write them and be like, can you write one for boys? But it's Lies That Girls Believe, and walking through. But they, in that book, they talk about sticky feelings. And when you were saying, May, like and this, refers to everybody, including adults even, that there's sticky feelings. Like, it's important to be able to engage in the dialogue about feelings and to encourage kids to be talking about those things without saying, yeah, I know exactly why. Here's all the reasons why I'm feeling this way. They might not know. So, and they might not even be able to identify exactly what the feeling is. And so we put a term on it called sticky feelings. So you might just have sticky feelings. That's okay. These sticky feelings are sticking to you for a reason, and we're going to get to the root of that. But let's just sit with that for a minute and let's just walk through. We'll be together. Like sometimes it's sitting on the floor with your child, with whether it's your child or someone else, and just drawing. Let's just draw a picture and let's just hang for a minute. Like let's breathe through your whatever emotion you're feeling because you just threw that cup on the ground and we don't really know why. Let's just draw for a minute and just kind of process. It's something sticking to you right now. That's okay. It'll unstick eventually because that's what happens.
I love that. And another great point to that, I think, Hannah, that you mentioned too, is like being like, yep, I feel that way too sometimes. Sometimes I have an emotion like that and I don't know what's going on. And I think sometimes we're so reticent to like be totally like, we don't want to maybe be totally transparent, but being somewhat transparent with the young people in our lives just to say like, yeah, I totally know what you mean. I've had emotions before where I'm like, why is this happening? And again, sometimes I think people would be surprised at how much that might take the situation from here to like, oh, you felt this way before too. Just, it can just pull everything down. And I see we have a question from the audience. Should I read it? Or do you guys want to read it?
The question, this comes from Rita, is what can we do to educate youth in schools that don't realize they're being trafficked or are dealing with so much?
I think we may get into that a little bit more in just a bit. So we'll come back to that.
I think we're going to lead into that soon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we got about 15-20 minutes left. So May, I do want to learn a bit more from you. So what can parents do specifically if when their child comes out?
Okay. So the term, coming out, just in case anyone isn't totally aware, is, it's when somebody tells someone else that they are part of the LGBTQ community. So they might be transgender, they might be gay, they might be bisexual, whatever that is. And I think really the biggest thing is just to be affirming with them, with what they share. Don't make assumptions or judgments. Don't bombard them with questions. Genuinely, like I know that you're going to have questions, like for sure. But like in that first moment, like really avoid being like, so how do you know? Or like what, even if you're asking that from like a very genuine wanting to know standpoint, that might not be the moment. That might be a conversation we talk about later, whatever. In that moment, I really think, again, it's about being affirming. One of the biggest things I think a lot of, again, even really well-meaning parents miss doing, and that I think is huge, is saying thank you for being like having the courage to share that with you. I know your 15-year-old is going to be like, whatever. But like, I guarantee you that like at some point in their lives, though, they're going to be like, but I'm glad you said that. And it might even be that moment. They just don't want to show it. Right. Because I think one of the things I will mention really quickly from my personal life is like, I knew my mom was very supportive of the LGBTQ community from a young age. I still was terrified to tell her, right? So like, even if you're like, well, they didn't have to have courage to tell me because I'm really supportive. Like, it still takes a lot to possibly face rejection, you know? So just be affirming, thank them for sharing with you. Don't bombard them with questions, and also recognize your own process and where you're going to be. Be willing to apologize if you make mistakes. You might start to bombard them with questions, just, you know, out of wanting to do it. Be willing to be like, you know what, this isn't the time for that. Sorry about it. Let's just celebrate that you know, felt comfortable enough to tell me about that. And again, we're kind of getting into this later on, but like, be willing to reach out to services. There are support groups for parents of youth who come out as transgender, for example, where the parents just kind of, that's where they vent and talk about how difficult it is. All that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my quick way to, I don't do anything quick, I know, but that's my quick way to encapsulate how I would recommend handling that situation.
That was so good. And again, just referencing back to education, right? It's so important to recognize your own process and to really take the time and effort to educate yourself. That's powerful right there. I'm so glad that you sort of brought that up. It's huge. Emily, are you?
I think she's,
oh, there you are.
I think she's a little frozen.
Can you hear me?
Now we
Okay,
can.
we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
In and out.
In and out.
Okay.
Well, there you are.
The next question we were going to get into. Okay. Unless Hannah, if I'm going to cut out, we're on question number 7. If you want to.
Yeah. I think you're good though. You're here. You're in. Go for it.
So,
yeah.
As we know, as many of us know, there are many factors that can lead into someone being trafficked. Runaway and homeless youth being a major one. When youth are on the streets, it's very easy for a trafficker, pimp, etc. to approach them and give them all kinds of false promises. So what are some of the risky behaviors a youth may engage in that could be trafficking or could lead to trafficking?
Yeah. So I think, hold on, I'm trying to get my notes pulled up here a little bit, but
we can start by saying social media.
Yeah, that's where we're kind of starting, is social media. There's a lot of different factors that go into this one. I'm not sure if do you guys kind of want to start with what maybe you guys think of as the big red flags with social media?
So just with social media in general, it's so easy to meet with and talk with, well, I shouldn't say meet with, but talk with strangers, people that you don't know. You have people DMing you, private messaging you, commenting on your pictures, especially if your profile is not private. And engaging with people that you don't know and having those conversations. And I think something that we know about traffickers and pimps is that or even just predators, is that they know how to sweet talk, and they'll make things seem super awesome, just like sweep you off your feet, in the beginning stages, and then slowly work their way into grooming you into, isolating yourself, meeting up with them, it becoming a relationship. And so those kinds of things aren't always trafficking, but it can be, manipulation or, dating violence.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about like, how do we protect youth from that? Because it's so complicated. And social media is just a complicated one, because again, I know like the knee-jerk reaction, right, is okay, then no social media like ever, or like until you're 18. And I'm going to be honest, it's 2021. You're not going to be able to do it. You're never going to be able to do it. And in some ways, I think completely cutting someone off entirely,
that would make me want to run away.
Exactly.
I'll just run away and get a phone from somewhere, and because
exactly,
that's their connection, that's their world, that's their connection.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And
So
even like gaming too, like online games. So there's all kinds of chat boxes, and
oh
there's
yeah. Yeah, I've had
I
to
was
tell people
just gonna
before
say
that
that.
on Fortnite they're
Yep.
always playing with people they don't know. Like always. That's always what it is. So like you have to understand like how that kind of stuff works, but then at the same time it's like then, you know, what if that's something they really do enjoy and have fun with? How can we talk about being safe while doing stuff like that? But I know we'll get into that in a second, because right now this question is just about, hey, what are some of the things? I think another social media red flag that I like to mention too is OnlyFans. That one's huge right now. The amount of young girls that I hear say, when I turn 18, the way I'm going to make money is making an OnlyFans. For anyone unaware of
I
OnlyFans,
just send pictures of my feet and it's no big deal.
Feet
And
pics,
there's
yeah.
stupid men out there that'll pay for that. And I don't have to give them anything. You know, they don't ask for anything else. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, how
And
are you going to
it's,
stay in control of that situation?
yeah, and just to be clear too, because some people might be sitting here like, I don't know what OnlyFans is it's basically a website that actually was not made for sex work, but that is what it has primarily become, is a way for people to engage in sex work. And again,
taking videos, taking pictures
Yeah.
of themselves, pornography, and then selling it.
Right.
But what people don't realize, or maybe they do realize, is people can screenshot, screen record, and then a lot of that is being put on other sites, and people are then actually making money off of you,
Yeah.
and exploiting you.
Yeah,
And
I actually watched a video with a girl who she started doing that when she was an adult. It was all consensual. It was her choice. But like she even said, she was like, I tell people when they ask me about it, she's like, are you aware that everybody you know is going to know about this? Are you aware that, you know, so even, you know, I've seen people talk about, even when it's completely consensual, that there are risk factors. But of course, when I'm hearing a 15-year-old already talking about OnlyFans, to me, that's a red flag, like straight up. Because
who are role models these days? Who are girls' role models? And what are we seeing in like movies, the music industry, like more and more TV shows on teenagers?
Oh, Emily's breaking
like,
up a little bit.
You know, this hookup culture. I mean, yeah, it's sorry. Okay. It wasn't important.
No, it's okay. You just broke up a little bit.
Yeah, we got the gist of it though, because
Yeah.
it's important what you were saying, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's just kind of it's just one of those things that, again, it's like, if I'm hearing a 15-year-old talking about OnlyFans, just being aware, like, okay, let's maybe talk about what that actually is. And like, hey, again, I mean, we'll talk about this in a minute, but I do think there is that danger in my response to that being a complete lockdown and you're never allowed on the internet again. That could do more harm than good, right? Even though I totally understand that reaction is probably born out of wanting to keep that person safe, right? But I do want to move on to some of the other, I'm trying to think of how this question.
Which goes along with pornography.
Yes.
OnlyFans is, you know, making pornographic content of yourself, and or someone's, you know, making the content of you, but watching pornography, a lot of what we see in pornography these days can be very violent and non-consensual. There's all kinds of pornography is not how you want youth to learn about sex education, to say the very least. And so that could be a tool too, that maybe the youth is watching pornography and saying, oh, wow, like she looks like she's really enjoying that, or she's making a lot of money, I can do that too.
Yeah.
Or, and then it's grooming and teaching the boys too, that that's what girls like, and I can, maybe they're persuading the girls to, you know, make content and send it to them. And so pornography can be a huge influencer. And I know this may be a repeat for a lot of you folks. Hannah and I have done a couple episodes on pornography, maybe even 3. And we have a separate episode on OnlyFans too. But
awesome.
So you can check those out if you want to learn more about those.
And I think one of the other points too, that this is very, very specific to runaway and homeless youth in a lot of ways. It can happen with a lot of other populations, but like, really happens with them is what we call survival sex. And survival sex can lead into things like OnlyFans, or especially right now, like again, in the year 2021, because I think more traditionally what survival sex was thought of is, having to engage in sex work or being forced to perform sexual acts for money. Might be a roof over your head, all that kind of stuff. Again, nowadays it's kind of evolved to like, it might be like setting up an OnlyFans page, again.
The people having OnlyFans accounts has skyrocketed.
Yes.
The creators, because they've lost their job, they're unemployed. It's an easy way to make money.
And you're again, when we look at all these intersections, if I'm a young LGBTQ like Black woman, maybe I've had a really difficult time with certain parts of my life, and now I genuinely, like, I'm not even going to say I think, like, maybe genuinely the only way I've been able to make money is doing something like that. And in some ways, right, that is survival sex, because maybe I don't like it at all. Like, maybe I hate it, but I'm like, that's the only way I know how to make money. And then the last thing I want to mention too, because I think this is really important, is things like drug dealing, being told to steal things. These kind of things with runaway and homeless youth can be considered trafficking, because it's basically, it functions in a very similar way to what we think of as labor trafficking, which is a huge issue in a lot of other ways. But this way that kind of intersects with runaway and homeless youth, is I might get involved with, a group of people who that's how they make money. And they're like, maybe they all were struggling to find somewhere to live. And they're like, so that's what we do to make money. And I'm like, I don't want to do that at all. But then I get pulled into it. And now I'm doing that. And I'm being, threatened or whatever to continue it. And so I think sometimes we do have to consider that, like, especially when we're talking about young, vulnerable people, that, they're not just someone who's like, oh, they went off and now they're, dealing drugs or stealing stuff. A lot of times there is a bigger picture going on there. There is someone at the top, who is manipulating, threatening, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, those are some of kind of the ways that I think.
Yeah. And we can have a whole separate episode on the risk factors.
Exactly.
But Hannah, I know you had mentioned you had to slip away, so I don't want to keep you if you have to leave. May and I will probably stay on for another 10 minutes or so.
Sure. For sure. Yeah, I am going to have to slip away. But before I do, I just wanted to quick ask you the question and sort of maybe tee up the ball here. But in terms of prevention, like we talked about the lures and so the risk factors, but in terms of prevention, what can we do to protect our youth in our lives, from these risk factors, and really perhaps incorporate the question that Rita had, what can we do to educate our youth in schools that don't realize that they're being trafficked and are dealing with, with so much. And I'd like to just say really quick before I take off is one of the things that is a big motivation for me is like educating youth in schools, creating a curriculum right now I've been working on to bring education into our high schools and incorporating it into the health and sex ed classes, because those are required in the state of Michigan for high school students. And so bringing in that curriculum and doing what I can to get my way into the schools to start educating the youth themselves and middle school and high school about the issues of trafficking. So and we've done different programs and things like that, and we're continuing to work on that. So I love that question, Rita, and I'm like so with you. This is such an important thing, and I leave it to you, amazing human beings, to continue that conversation. Mwah. Thank you guys. I enjoyed my cup of hope. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Well, yeah, because it sounds like part of the answer to Rita's question is having really great people in your community like Hannah who are doing that kind of work. I do think that's a huge part of it, and part of why it is so difficult with something like what can we do to educate youth in schools? It's like you need to have people doing the work to do that. I think is huge. But definitely with Hannah's question, how do we protect our youth in the youth in our lives from these risk factors? And I think
taking notice of
the
behavior changes and those red flags.
Yeah. knowing things, coming to events like this, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and education is huge. And I think kind of to Hannah's point, like starting off with, okay, she's going to be going to the schools talking about this. It's like being willing to have those conversations about it, because some of the most vulnerable people to something like sex trafficking are people who no one's taught them about sex or sex education or talked about sex trafficking with them, right? People who have, maybe their parents or the school that they go to is just like, no, we don't talk about that.
Or their only teacher has been pornography, or their
exactly. And then they're ill-equipped to, when they're in a situation like the ones that we talked about, they might not even realize that that's not how it's supposed to be. And then they're completely, because people can get, stuck in a situation like that, even with all the education in the world, unfortunately. But the person with all the education is a lot more likely to realize it's not a good situation and start looking for a way out, versus someone who's like, well, this is just normal. This is just how it's supposed to be. Another big one that I know we've talked about before, Emily, and I kind of mentioned before, is that I think it's huge and really important for when we are talking about stuff like social media to really, really have a discussion about those kinds of things. Rather than like I said, like just saying no internet for you. I know you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to add real quick. A big part of Hannah's curriculum too is it's not all just like human trafficking. It's just like dating, like the violence, manipulation, coercion that can happen in a dating relationship.
Huge.
What is, like, just like healthy intimacy and like mutual respect and boundaries.
Yeah.
And so those red flags of, like isolating people, being extremely jealous, having their, kids these days are always sharing their location with each other. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track, because we're going to get into social media discussions. How do you have parameters around social media?
Yeah, because I think it is difficult, but like when I have conversations around social media with, like I said, my sister's 9 years younger than me. So when I'm talking about it with her, or when I'm talking about it with the kids at the shelter or whatever, and I do pose that question to them of like, do your parents monitor your social media usage? Or like, how would you feel if they did? And overwhelmingly their response is either if their parents do, or if they're thinking about if their parents did do that, their response is usually, I would find a way around it, and I would not trust my parents. I would not talk to them about anything that came up anymore, and they would probably isolate from like their parents. So I think often what ends up happening with oftentimes well-meaning, I want to protect this person reaction of monitoring social media or cutting it off entirely, is it kind of just ends up driving them back from us. Wherein
parents make sneaky kids.
Exactly, unfortunately, right? Like some of the things I've seen before with the youth to get around stuff like their parents knowing, what they're texting about or whatever, they'll come up with code words, right? They'll find ways to be like, oh, I was just talking about going to the basketball game, and that's what the text says because they figured it out, versus a youth who has had like genuine discussions with their parent. Their parent has been like, you can always come and talk to me, whatever. That youth then might, come to them and say, hey, like I got asked by this guy to come meet him and I kind of don't know what to think about it. Right. And then you can have that conversation. Or, hey, remember when we talked about this? Like, did you notice this sign? Did you notice that? Because we've had that conversation already. Or maybe we haven't. Maybe we've never had that conversation before, but I've laid the groundwork for the young person in my life to be like, I can talk to this person about that. I can go to them and talk to them about it. They're not going to get mad at me, right? Because when I think about that situation, right, there's a couple ways it can go. Just using that situation as an example real quick, of a young person who knows they're talking to someone way older than them. If their parent is super strict,
don't know, or the person has lied to them.
Well, but I'm using an example where they do know, because my point is, if they do know, they might know, like looking on Facebook, they might know this guy's 25, right? And if their parent is super strict and has been like, you'll be in so much trouble if blah, 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 they're not even going to tell their parent. right?
Yeah.
They're going to be like, well, I can't tell them because I'll get into so much trouble. Versus the youth whose parent has been like, hey, you shouldn't do this, but if it does come up, come talk to me about it. Now they're going to come talk about it and they're going to have that conversation and we can know, hey, that's not healthy. We shouldn't be doing that. Thank you for telling me about it though. Because things like this are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Youth are going to make mistakes. They're going to engage in things. Or to your point, they're going to be lied to and they're going to go, I don't think this guy is older than me. His page says he's 16. And the parent's going to look and be like, this guy's like 30. Right. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but they still knew to come to their parent when they were feeling something was feeling off. So I think it's having those conversations versus that super heavy monitoring or like no internet, no nothing kind of thing. I think the conversations, the discussions are the biggest piece. And that kind of goes for all this stuff, you know, sex ed, pornography,
Mm-hmm.
healthy relationships. It's being willing to have those conversations over, you know, any kind of negative reaction.
Yeah. And you can still like set some parameters, like with pornography. You can still have like, you know, some parental controls. You can block ads. So like pictures aren't showing up. But kids these days are porn is going to pop up on their screen.
Yes.
However much you try to prevent it, it's going to pop up somehow, somewhere on some site or a friend's phone. So yeah, having a conversation about that too.
Yeah.
Like, this is what these images are. This is like, you know, why we don't look at that or why it's inappropriate, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. I think the example we used last time we talked about this is I was like, I'm all for somebody blocking like a porn website off of their kid's computer 100%. You're never going to be able to block them all.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you're never going to be able to block it off the friend's computer or something like that. So it's better to just have that discussion.
There's a book out there too for like younger kids. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures.
Oh, interesting.
We can throw that out there. But
yeah.
May, real quick, we got 3 minutes. So
I know.
Give us common ground in a nutshell and any other services available for families, parents, caregivers, friends.
Yeah. So the first thing at the bottom, as you see, you can go to our website at Common Ground Helps. That's helps, HELPS.org. Or you could always reach out to me at mfreck@commongroundhelps.org if you have any questions, if I don't cover anything right now. But just to start with, Common Ground is a relatively large agency, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of our programs, but some of the most relevant ones to what we're talking about right now. Number one, I would genuinely say is our crisis line, just because that is like a good way into any of the other services that we have. The number off the top of my head, it's not coming, so I'm going to go to the website while I'm talking. But you can call
line, May.
I know I did. I know. But to be fair, I did actually work for the chat part, so wasn't usually taking calls. So that number is 1-800-231-1127. Again, 24/7, people can call it 2 a.m. I think a really good one with that one is, you know, if you have that youth who is not talking to you, isn't being open to you, that's something you can say, hey, maybe you don't want to talk to me. This exists. You can talk to that whenever. You know, you can reach out, you can call, they can go to our website and chat there. They can text that number as well. So, you know, they can reach out and they're talking to a mental health professional at that point who's just going to talk them through whatever's going on. Maybe they need to talk to that person about how to tell you that something is going on, right? So I think that's a great resource for both adults with young people in their lives and to give to those young people if they're kind of pulling away, not having that conversation. Then we have the Runaway and Homeless Youth Shelter, which I'm in right now. We have our Basic Center program where they stay with us for up to 21 days. That's where they're having that family crisis. They're experiencing some kind of running away, homelessness. And we really work on bringing that family back together. We have a longer term.
10 to 17.
10 to 17, yes. Thank you for reminding me. 10 to 17 for ages. We have a longer term program that's just for 16 and 17-year-olds where they kind of live with us in this building actually for about 18 months. And that's where the family reunification is looking a lot shakier and they're going to stay with us more long term. And we have our graduated apartment program for ages 18 to 24. People can reach out to the Housing Resource Center. You can Google that. The number will come up. That's where you kind of reach out to if you're experiencing homelessness in like our Tri-County area. So that's a great place to start as well. We have, for LGBTQ youth, we have drop-in centers in the community. Affirmations and Ruth Ellis Center are the two in our area. Affirmations is in Ferndale, Ruth Ellis is in Detroit. And they both have other programs as well for LGBTQ people and youth. There are also like support groups and things like that at those locations, and at a specific program called Stand with Trans. They have some programs for transgender youth and for parents of transgender youth who are like really struggling. Maybe, you know, they want to be supportive, but they're having a hard time. Great resource there. And Ruth Ellis has intensive family programs. So like if you have, or you're that family where like you really want to, you know, have that or really need that intensive family therapy, yeah, you know, that one's available as well. And we also have our victims assistance program at Common Ground. Again, you'll want to go to commongroundhelps.org for more more programming notes and all that kind of stuff. Just don't have the time right now to share it all. I know we got to wrap up, but thank you for having me.
This has been super informative, May. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for who attended live with us. And we hope that you will join us next month. Actually, it'll be September 15th, same time, same place, noon on Facebook Live. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks.